we got a spicy one today.
Yes, we do. Episode 2.
Episode 2.
We're not holding back. We're taking season 4 like pretty seriously this year.
We are talking weight loss drugs. People have been asking us to discuss this for so long, and there's so much to talk about when it comes to these weight loss drugs. They're getting so much attention in the headlines. So I'm really excited for us to give our dietitian take on it.
Yeah, I agree. We are kind of the front lines with it. You know, we've been,
every day.
Yeah, I first saw liraglutide in like 2016, 2017.
Mm-hmm.
Semiglutide came out in around like 2020 is when you started to see it with diabetics. I mean,
Totally.
this isn't new to us,
yeah.
but it's new to everyone else. And obviously the more people that do it, the more data there is. And
Totally.
we're on the front lines. We're the ones that actually get to see the people's experiences and
also navigate it.
Yeah, we're the mediators of information. And so who better than us? Unfortunately, docs don't know a ton about the side effects, the day-to-day strategies. And so I think that's what I want to hopefully get out of this today is like,
absolutely.
I want to like scream from the rooftops. One, I want people to understand what they are, how they work, so they're not surprised.
Mm-hmm.
But I also want to make sure we talk about the nutrition strategies to make sure if you're going to do them, you do them correctly.
Totally.
That's big for me.
Totally. We're kind of like our client's Yoda navigating this.
Exactly.
And so we want to be able to help them figure out like what to expect, help them weigh the options that are on the table and kind of make an informed decision for themselves. That's what we're all about, right? It's like patient autonomy. Like give them the information and then like let them make the decision that's best for them.
Perfect.
Because there's so much to talk about when it comes to these weight loss drugs. I really want to we could talk about the ethics, we could talk about the logistics and the politics about it. I'd really like to keep most of our conversation focused on like the science behind it, what patients really need to know, what they can expect, and just like how to navagate it and how
actionable
we help
info.
people.
I like it.
So.
I like it. It's funny too, because you know, as you know, I did an Ozempic rant about 8 months ago now.
Yeah.
And it went viral. I mean, I've never had a post that went viral to that degree.
Oh, yeah.
And that's exactly why. But it was, you know, it was a 7 or 8 minute rant that covered, you know, the mechanism of action, how it's being used, some of the controversy that's out there. And what makes me laugh is when I brought it up, one of the things I said at the very end was, put your pitchforks away because the side effects are actually just basically amplified effects if you understand what you're putting in your body.
Mm-hmm.
And wouldn't you know it, 3 weeks ago, there's a class action lawsuit against semiglutide for gastroparesis, which is hilarious when you realize that that's literally what it's supposed to do.
It's working as it's designed.
Yep. One of my clients sent it to me and I responded back to them and I was like, I'm a victim. I took a drug that did what it told me it was going to do, and now I want paid for it. And it's just, you just like roll your eyes. So hopefully what we can do is set the record straight. But real quick, yes or no, GLP-1s?
Yes or I can't answer that yes or no. It depends. My answer is it depends. That's always going to be my answer.
Well, you stole it from me too. I think we kind of match on that. Yeah. GLP-1s and really, we're going to dig into this into a second, GIP/GLP-1s, because there's this whole world we've got to dig into.
So this isn't like an hour long of us promoting them or bashing them. We're like literally just trying to give a balanced account of what they are.
Exactly.
How to navigate them.
I like to say that it's our job. We understand all the tools in the toolbox. And sometimes you need a hammer and sometimes you need a screwdriver, and we can be the handyman that helps you know which one to use given the circumstance. And so today we get to talk about the screws and the screwdrivers, right? It depends. Is that the project you're working on? So without further ado, let's dig in. Where do you want to go first? Do we need to talk like biology, physiology, mechanistic stuff? What are we doing? Are we nerding out?
Would like to talk about what preceded these drugs. Because the truth is they're not the first drugs that have been used on the market for weight loss.
Very true.
And so take us back to the history of it.
So it's
Before
fun.
I was a dietitian.
Yeah. But, I see how this is. Okay. Come around, children. Let the
old
dietitian tell you about the old days when we used to have phentermine and Ally and Qsimia. Oh, man. Well, those were probably the 3 that are probably the most relevant. They still exist to some degree.
Mm-hmm. I still see them prescribed to my patients.
Yeah. And I will say I was not a fan of any of them. Right. I've been very, very hesitant about weight loss drugs my entire professional career. Phentermine is probably the one that people know most. Before it was
Legal
called
speed.
legal speed. Before it was called phentermine, there was something chemically very similar called Adipex. That was in the 90s. If anybody got the original hydroxycut thermogenics from the supplement world, they were chemically very similar at lower doses. These are all beta 2 adrenergic receptor modulators.
Okay, what does that mean?
Yeah, and so they act on
English,
basically
please.
beta 2, which is the receptor, the adrenergic receptor, so adrenaline basically. So these worked on your adrenaline receptors, and like you said, basically put you in an adrenaline state.
Yeah.
And so it was chemically, what it did was what speed does and what cocaine does, right? Uppers are all beta 2 adrenergic receptor modulators. They modify how your adrenaline interacts with your body, and it basically causes your metabolism to go nuts. The problem is, it's kind of like pressing fast forward on your body. And so it works really well, but then when you come off of it, it actually like stalls out.
Yeah.
And so what ends up happening is you get people that have this super hypermetabolic state for a period of time, but it's kind of like when we talk about the idea of you can either press pause or play or rewind or fast forward, right? How are you going to watch the movie? When you press fast forward, you have to press rewind, unfortunately. So they would take these drugs and they'd lose a ton of weight really quickly while their blood pressure was through the roof, their heart rate was really high, their pulse pressure, stress, anxiety, sweats, not thriving is what we'll say. And then they'd come off and their metabolisms would just stall out and sputter. And so now they're regaining weight at a calorie deficit and they're ravenous. And it's, again, it's just, it really was a bad
calorie
bargain.
deficit, right? Now becomes their maintenance or potentially even a surplus.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's challenging.
So that was the first one. And I personally hate those because that's a checkers move in a game of chess, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
It's kind of like one of those where it's like, king me. And it's like, well, no, that's not really the game we're playing here.
Yeah.
We're not trying to just get to the destination. We're trying to arrive there by habit and then stay there, right? It's not about getting there. It's how long you stay there. And that med, the rebound was pretty much a guarantee. And I will say the good thing about it is it did sort of teach us a lot about metabolism and the effects of extended periods of cortisol and all of those types of things. But unfortunately, we tested it on real humans that were trying to live better and healthier. And we didn't sell them health. We sold them snake oil in that instance. And by we, I don't mean us because that wasn't, but it's we as in the medical populace. You know? So that was that one. Like you said, still very much present. Every time I see it, I just roll my eyes. We don't want to be spiking adrenaline because it's coming back and it's going to get harder and harder and harder.
Yeah, it's like weight loss for weight loss sake. Something I always weigh with my clients who desire weight loss is what is it for? What is at the other end of X number of pounds that you're searching to lose? How is your health going to improve? How is your life going to improve? So those are always things that we want to weigh. And a lot of times with drugs like that, it's you may be losing weight, but at what cost?
Yeah.
And is this a long-term solution?
It's funny when you think about that. It's unfortunately in our society, weight loss is symbolic of being healthier.
Yes.
Right? People come in and they say, I want to lose weight. It's like, well, what do you want? And usually when you get to the thing behind the thing, it's, I want to be healthier. And it's like, well, I hate to tell you, weight loss may or may not be that, right? It's that's that idea of if you take a shortcut. So if in the journey to getting healthier, you do unhealthy things, at the end of the journey, you're not at healthy land. You're at unhealthy land, right? You starve yourself and use weight loss drugs and you end up sick and cachexic and fragile with a broken pelvis because you have poor bone density. You kind of missed the point. Yeah, no lean mass, no muscle mass, exactly. So it is, unfortunately, we've gotten, because so many people would benefit from a lifestyle that as a side effect causes weight loss, we've kind of transitive propertied it. And we're like, oh, well, the habits and the lifestyle cause the weight loss, but the weight loss is the easier metric to point at. Everyone can buy a scale. It's the doctor can do it in 13 seconds of their 5 minutes. So we very much normalized it. And to your point, it's a really good question, which is one, is weight loss actually a good indicator of health? But then two, it's when we think about how you achieved it, did you sell your soul to get the outcome? Because if so, you probably didn't actually get to your real goal.
Right. Yeah. I mean, weight loss is not often, but it is sometimes a side effect of the healthy interventions that we're placing, helping people cultivate in their lives. And so it is just that, right? It's, not to say that weight loss can't, improve, decrease in fat mass can't improve inflammatory markers and things like that. It's not to say that it doesn't take some pressure off your joints and things like that, but it is so often just a side effect of the lead measures of what we're trying to achieve,
Exactly.
right? So those habits and behaviors are the lead measures. The weight loss is one of the lag measures. One of the other lag measures are, improved metrics, in their blood work and things like that, improved quality of life and things like that. So
Well said.
anyways, not to get too
So
off
no, but
track,
you're
but
right,
that
and
was,
I will say that's phentermine, right? That's
yeah.
what it did is it caused weight loss by any means necessary. And so it created weight loss for the sake of weight loss. But when you look at what it did from a health outcomes perspective, the people gained it back and then some. And because of the cortisol and all the adrenaline in the bloodstream, it repositioned and increased visceral fat mass upon weight rebound. It created seasons of yo-yo dieting and weight cycling. And every time you lose it and gain it, there's a metabolic disadvantage to that.
Oh, yeah.
And every time you try and lose it again, it gets harder and harder because it's visceral, it's more hormonally active.
Yeah.
And then some of the most complex weight loss clients that I've ever worked with to date are ones that took the Adipex in the 90s, took the phentermines in the early 2000s, and now they're in their 40s and 50s, and their metabolism is just shot.
Yeah.
And it's not surprising. It's no different than why diabetes happens. If your pancreas, if you were born with a pancreas that was meant to live 120 years, and every time you pound 100 grams of sugar, it takes a year off its life, it's going to poop out at 60 and you're going to be diabetic. That's just, that's a very simplistic way to look at it, but that's how it works. Same thing, if you're going to press fast forward on your metabolism and your adrenal gland over and over, why are we surprised that it poops out when you're 50 or 60?
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden, even giving yourself that adrenaline no longer works.
And there's some really good evidence to support too that, because the yo-yo dieting is something that I see so frequently. They're honestly my favorite types of people to work with is
Same.
those who have gone through that yo-yo dieting cycle, because I'm like, let's just get you off the roller coaster.
Yep.
But there's good evidence to support that your risk of all-cause mortality is actually higher for those who have gained and lost weight
repeatedly
than those who have just been consistently at a slightly higher weight.
Exactly. It becomes that game of like the middle would be a much better reality. And so I always say, instead of the rewind, fast forward volatility, let's watch the movie the right way. Let's press pause and press play. There's going to be seasons of life where we're not going to be able to trend down because of important things, family vacations, holidays, stresses, illnesses, whatever.
It's
press
a priority.
pause.
It's not the highest priority.
Yep. And it comes back to all of our stuff. The idea of living like the healthier you, living like the lighter you, and recognizing that for most people in the US, in terms of percentage, if you were taking care of yourself, prioritizing time for you, sleep, stress management to the best of your ability, eating well, moving well, you would likely be leaner and lighter. That is true for most people, not all people, but most people. But that doesn't mean that weight loss is the actual goal, right? It's kind of just that side effect, like you said.
Well,
so that was phentermine. Yeah, the other two. Well, I was
the other
going to
two.
say,
Talking about the other two first.
We can go there a little bit quicker. I think phentermine was the one that it really blew up, and it was very, very frustrating to watch. Qsymia was the other one that I'd say. And that was more of the appetite suppressant and antidepressant. And so that one had sort of genuine intentions, which is like, hey, is this a way to combat binge eating, particularly if it's like a psychological trigger, right? So if you have someone who's really depressed and may use food as a source of connection and dopamine as like a coping mechanism, Qsymia can be something that helps reduce the appetite and then also helps improve the mood. And the way I like to think about it is, if our mood exists on a spectrum of -10 to +10, and you live at a -3, and a tasty meal is a +1, you're going to eat that tasty meal and then you're going to be at -2. So then you're going to eat it again and again and again and again and again, just to get to that +1, which doesn't feel good, but it gives you a chance to go, which is what people that are suffering from anxiety and depression often need. They just need to feel like they have a break. And so when you take an anxiety or depression med like an SSRI, it raises your baseline to 0, which now all of a sudden a meal that's a +1 gives you that. And so I don't hate that concept, but it's also to say it really only works for a niche of people, because some people metabolically really aren't overeating necessarily, and not everybody's anxious or depressed that has a need. So there's a lot of people that this med doesn't work for. But that said, it's probably one of the better ones that's worked out there, right? It's a mixture of Wellbutrin and an appetite suppressant. And there's a time and a place to use it, but it's also, if you're using it, and this is going to be something you'll notice over and over and over again with all these meds we talk about, you need to be working on your relationship with food during it.
1,000%.
Even if it's something you stay on for life, which you shouldn't, you may keep the Wellbutrin and phase off the appetite suppressant. The idea is if it takes away the impulse to eat excessively, that should give you some time to learn other outlets, right? If there's stressors and food was always the go-to, just like if you were trying to quit smoking, you can't just quit cold turkey without all alternative habits, right? Same thing here.
Yeah, it's like replacement is so much easier to just removal.
Exactly.
Substitution.
And so that's where that med is something we have to think about. Is it's never going to be a long-term replacement. It's going to be something that gives us a chance to learn other habits. And I'll even double back to the phentermine. One of the things that's worth noting is there will be some people, and they may even comment on this, like, oh, well, like I used it and it changed my life. And what I would challenge them with is, did it change your life, or was it the lightning bolt that led you to change your life? Which is to say, what did you start doing during, right? Was it the thing that gave you that initial motivation to change? And then you started going to the gym all the time and changing how you ate and started grocery shopping and meal prepping, started doing all this other stuff. And then you got off the med and you kept doing those things. Because if so, like the med might have like helped you get out of the atmosphere, but you're the one that went to the moon. And that's where you'll watch that happen over and over and over again with any of these meds. None of these meds replace habits. They may be something that can help catalyze habits. I like to think of them as training wheels for habits. While you're developing lifestyle habits, they can be the things that help disproportionately reward you so that you feel more motivated initially. It's the idea that they may help you get out of the atmosphere, which is the hardest part of space travel. It requires the most fuel, right? But once you get out of the atmosphere, you still got to do the work. And you watch that happen. The phentermine, if that was the intervention worked, in quote unquote, and then when it went away, it went away. Qsymia, same thing, right? If you just use that as a Band-Aid on a bullet wound, like it looks like you fixed it initially until it starts bleeding through.
Totally. Well, I feel like that's going to become relevant when we talk about some of
It is. I was going to say, we're going to be coming back to that. The last one real quick is Ally. And that one's pretty fun because it's laughable. It basically was a fat malabsorber, and it was built out of the 90s, the low fat crazes, and it was, well, how can we if we can't eat low fat, how can we absorb less fat? And unfortunately, it was a compound that binds to fat in your intestine. And for those of you that don't know this, fat is a lubricant. It is the thing that makes the slippery slide. If you ever want to test this out, if you've got one of those little sliding boards in the back for your kids, take some olive oil and just like wipe it on the slide and then put your kid down it, and it's going to shoot them through the window, right? Like they're going to fly off the slide. We're going to have
to cut that.
Yeah.
We don't encourage that.
Yeah, probably don't actually do that. Liability right here. But
that's how fats work.
And that's how that works. And so it really can ruin some underwear. We'll put it that way. Well, people started having to go wardrobe shopping real frequently.
There are some hilarious horror stories, not to diminish anyone's suffering. But yes. Fat malabsorption.
Not to mention the bad part of it, which is if you're not going to absorb the fats, what about the fats that you need to absorb for fats are the precursor to testosterone and estrogen production. The reason we have nice skin that isn't super dry, the reason our hair doesn't look all frizzy and stuck. I mean, fat and phospholipids are an important aspect of our entire physiology.
Absolutely.
So you can't have zero fats. It's going to cause your joints to ache. I mean, the list goes on and on. But so there were some other issues there. But so those were kind of like I'll call those the big three, because there's lots of other ones out there, but those were the ones that really started to be medicine's intention to try and intervene with what we saw, when we started to see this hypercaloric environment, particularly in the United States, weight skyrocketing, chronic diseases going alongside it.
Kind of a Band-Aid to kind of address this environment that was really obesogenic.
Well said.
Right.
Yeah, it was, how can we help?
Access to hypercaloric foods at any given time you could possibly want, reduced need to do any kind of physical activity. The natural progression of that is that we're going to have an obesity epidemic. And this was the first tool that they tried to use, or variety of tools they used to try to address these. And here we are today. Didn't seem to work super well.
No, clearly not.
But then we have these semiglutides come out, or I guess first liraglutide and then semaglutide.
And now tirzepatide. I would say that one wrong, but that's the Mounjaro and
Yep.
Zepbound.
Yep.
And it's slightly different. So the semaglutide is the one that's probably most popular. That's Ozempic,
Yep.
also Wegovy. And
Uh-huh.
Ozempic and Wegovy are the same thing.
Yep.
It's just higher dosages.
Mhm.
And they're semaglutide. And semaglutide is a GLP-1 agonist, glucagon-like peptide-1 agonist. It's actually a receptor agonist. So it actually works on the receptor where GLP-1 goes. And so it can also be referred to as a GLP-1 mimetic, which is say it looks and acts like GLP-1. And so semaglutide does that. Tirapeptide, wow, I'm butchering that one's name. We're going to just go ahead and call it Mounjaro and Zepbound. It's funny. It's TIRA, but then my brain's just fumbling all the other letters. That's actually a GLP-1 receptor agonist, but then it also is a GIP receptor agonist, which is glucose-dependent, insulinogenic polypeptide. And
you remember that one?
Yeah, I was gonna say I got that one. Like of all the things, right? Like, it's always the easy stuff that the brain goes like, nah, we don't have room for that. It's kind of like deleting the one photo when you have no memory and it's like you could have deleted the 60-minute video, but delete the one picture. But anyway,
GIP-1.
It's GLP-1 and GIP. So it actually does two things, which is how those two kind of are different. And I will say that so semaglutide came out in 2020 is when it really came out a lot for diabetes. And then obviously in the last year and a half or 2 years, it's gotten regulated and permitted for weight loss purposes, which that's the one that kind of led to this. But then Eli Lilly came out with the Mounjaro as the sort of its next gen. And I will say that it does work better in terms of, because it works on both of those things, it has a bigger and more pronounced effect.
Yeah.
But we can kind of dig into the GLP-1, what it does at a
that was going to be one of my next questions. Like, could you explain how it works?
Yeah, absolutely.
How do some of these drugs work?
I think this is such an important thing for people to understand, because so many of the symptoms and side effects are very predictable when you understand what it does.
Yep.
So GLP-1 is something that's naturally in our body. After we eat a meal, it spikes in our bloodstream pretty much immediately. It's one of the first hormones in the cascade of what we'd call our like hunger and fullness cues. And so it sort of stimulates the rest of the digestive cascade. And GLP-1 lives in your blood, in your body for a couple minutes. It has a really short half-life. So you eat a meal, it spikes, and it's the thing that actually closes the stomach. And it says, hey, food is here, let's close the stomach to digest. And then it kind of disappears. And then other hormones down the line take over to prepare the stomach to open, to prepare enzymes to go into the intestine, to prepare digestion and all of those types of things, and sort of work their way down, right? It prepares insulin and all of that. GLP-1 is the first thing that closes the stomach and kind of prepares those next things. And so the two things it does is it increases your insulin sensitivity and response, which is sort of the next tier downstream, but it also closes the stomach. And those are the two main effects of how this med works. The difference is these meds have a 170-hour half-life instead of a 2-minute half-life. And so that's 168 hours in a week. They have a 7-day half-life, which means you inject a unit of it. A week later, there's still a half unit in your bloodstream. So instead of you having GLP-1 in your bloodstream for 2 minutes at a time, you just have it nonstop. So that's going to cause persistent insulin sensitivity and persistent stomach closing. And so what ends up happening is people's stomachs stay closed, which means they feel more full, which is sort of that initial desired effect. But they also then have stalled digestion, which we call gastroparesis. And there is definitely a dose response relationship to that. The higher the dose you take, the more it's going to tell your stomach to close and the more gastroparesis symptoms you're going to feel. And so if you have this mega dose and you're someone that's not diabetic, which means you really don't have a GLP-1 issue in the first place, all of a sudden you're going to have a stomach that will stall on you, right? You're going to think you actually have fully fledged gastroparesis. You'll start getting reflux. You might start vomiting.
Burping, that vomiting, that early satiety after just a little bit of food.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's what we'll say is that's kind of the core piece, right? It's a GLP-1. It closes the stomach. It makes you sensitive to insulin. It whispers down the lane. It does affect how your body uses fat and some other things, but those are the two core mechanisms.
Okay.
And then Zepbound / Mounjaro, they added the GIP. And
Mhm.
GIP is also an insulin sensitivity, but it increases and upregulates fat metabolism as well. So it
Mhm.
has an even more pronounced effect on body fat, which is why when we look at it as a weight loss drug, it seems to have a little bit more of a stronger effect. And
Mhm.
because it's not just pure GLP, it doesn't stall the stomach purely. So it has, if you
It's
take a
less
full
side
dose,
effects.
it's half and half, so to speak.
Yeah.
So it's going to have some of the stomach slowing, and then it's going to have a double down on the insulin side of things,
Mhm.
which is why it seems to have lower side effects.
Mhm.
That said, in both instances, the side effects are dose dependent,
Totally.
which is something that I think is really important. We should dig
Yeah,
into at some point.
totally. One thing I tend to see a lot in my practice is like as my clients are scaling up in dosage, that initial jump, they tend to really feel those side effects.
Yes.
And they do tend to taper off. They do tend to kind of adjust. Some of that's behavioral, some of them is physiological, but definitely as you're scaling up, you're really going to feel it. Or if you're new to this drug, you're going to feel the side effects probably more so than you will later on.
Absolutely.
But yeah, let's talk more about the side effects associated with it. So basically, it does suppress our appetite.
Yep.
It does that through kind of closing of the stomach through that GLP, which can then cause some of those side effects, like you mentioned, the reflux. I hear a lot of burping. I hear a lot of early satiety, which just means that you're getting full really quickly.
Exactly.
That's all. What are some of the other side effects?
Well, honestly, what's kind of funny is like those are really the main side effects if
Mm-hmm.
you're going to look at them. Again, it really is stomach closure, which means it's going to be all of those gastrointestinal issues that
Mm-hmm.
can cause vomiting. It can also cause some dumping syndrome,
Mm-hmm.
so varied bowel movements and things like that.
Yeah.
The rest of it, it's funny. You start to ask like it's like, oh, there's like a loss of lean mass. Like there's a lot of other things like that. You have to ask if those are actually side effects or if those are environmental effects.
Yeah.
Right?
So like effects of the drug's effects.
Yes, exactly. And so that's, I think that's such an important thing because you start to realize even the side effects we just said, they're not actually side effects. They're just undesirable effects, which is
Mm-hmm.
to say like you're taking a medication that's meant to close your stomach and then you're acting surprised that your stomach's closed.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy, but most people don't understand the mechanism, so they don't realize that's what they're trying to do to themselves.
Yes.
And from there, you start to look at sort of how the med's meant to work, right?
Yeah.
It's meant to cause weight loss by two mechanisms. One is because your stomach closes, which means you get full sooner. So that's the caloric restrictive element of the med.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a dose dependent scenario, right? You start someone low, they're going to be less and less able to eat the higher they go.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to start to, because their stomach isn't doing what it's supposed to do, they're not going to be able to digest protein as well. Protein's going to make them feel really sick and nauseous. So as they go higher and higher, their ability to eat balanced meals and really tolerate
Protein
food.
and fiber. So
Yep.
protein and vegetables, your produce. A lot of my clients really struggle with that when they're taking these drugs because I've kind of described it as like they get the ick from it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like those foods just like make them feel gross sometimes just
Well,
digestively
yeah.
because think about it, those are the foods that digest slowly.
And they
so the same
digest
thing,
in the stomach, right?
yes. And they're also the things, fats would be another example of those. If you're
Mhm.
eating a fattier meal, because that already, fats themselves slow digestion, then we
Massively.
have this other slowing of digestion a bit. It's going to cause us to feel sick.
Yep.
And so a lot of things, like one thing that my clients really crave when they're on this drug is your carbs, right? Because carbs are easy to
They
digest.
sponge up the acid
quickly.
in the stomach. They don't
Yep.
need any enzymes or acids in the stomach. They just kind of do their thing and go through.
Yes.
But yeah, it is. It's to note that the fats, the fibers, and the proteins are all really hard to digest, and so the ick is something that's actually fairly intuitive.
Yeah.
Right? Your body's telling you like, "Hey, I'm not capable of breaking this down right now. Don't give this to me." And that's no different than when you're sick and things don't sound appetizing. There's a level of intuition with that, and it's funny. It's kind of another sort of side quest. Is I always say, if we're driving from New York to LA, there's a plan we have on our road trip, but if you get a flat tire, the plan changes for a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing when we talk about lifestyle. You and I can sit down with a client and have these protein goals and these focuses, but then the moment they get sick, you hear people that are like, oh my gosh, I can't get enough protein. And it's like, you're not driving right now. You're changing your tire.
Yeah.
These are completely different things.
Yep.
You're allowed to abandon protein for 3 days while you deal with this illness. It's going to come back. And so there's something to be said about just recognizing that it all depends on how temporary this is. And if it's during the onboarding phase of a med, for example, you may not have that issue the whole time you're taking it. It may just be sort of an adjustment, as you kind of alluded to.
And one of the things I always like press onto my clients is that you should be really communicating with your doctor as you're tapering up this dose. Of course, like you said, there's maybe a little bit of an adjustment period, but if you're really consistently struggling to meet your nutrition needs, especially when it comes to those proteins and then the fiber, the vegetables, it's worth having a conversation with your doctor like, hey, I'm not tolerating this level of dose, right?
Yeah.
Your doctor only knows as much as you share with them. And so they're going to have a guess as to what's the appropriate dose for you. But really, what ends up being your appropriate dose is what you tolerate the best and what enables you to kind of achieve the goals that you're taking the drug for in the first place. It's not just weight loss by any means necessary as fast as possible. It's what can you live healthily on?
Perfectly said. And that's going back to sort of the two ways it helps people lose weight, right? The first way is by caloric restriction, like we said. Well, that's not ideal long term. It goes back to when people use it. This is when I have a problem with the medication. When we take someone who's not insulin resistant, who's not diabetic, and we put them on a max dose of this med, and all of a sudden they have such a slow stomach that they can barely eat 500 calories a day. And if they eat too much in one sitting, too much being still a very small amount of food, they throw up. That's going to cause weight loss by starvation. That is going to trigger a starvation mechanism. And while the med's in your system, you're not going to notice it. But the moment you come off the med, your body has been starving for 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, however long. It is going to rev back up. It is going to make you ravenous, and it is going to pull weight on, and you are going to gain it back obscenely fast, and likely then some. It's going to collect some interest on that.
Yeah.
And so using this med as a starvation-based weight loss strategy is stupid. It's idiotic.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's how most doctors prescribe it.
Yeah.
And so to your point, unfortunately, like people get on it and they start the small dose. The small dose, they don't feel much. The second dose, they go like, ooh, I'm starting to like this. The third dose, they're like, ooh, I like this. And then they go to the fourth dose and it's just too much because they're not actually diabetics. They're not meant to be using this. The problem is the insulin side, which is the section 2 of the weight loss, right? So there's the caloric restriction side, which is temporary, but it causes the fast, quote unquote, weight loss. The comment we need to come back to is weight loss what we're actually trying to do? Because weight loss isn't fat loss, right? Weight loss is water, muscle, fat. If you're starving yourself, you might lose weight on the scale quicker, but you're abandoning muscle mass and carb stores and water stores on the way down that your body desperately needs to maintain metabolic function and longevity and immune function and hormone function and focus and clarity and mood, all of it, right? It's your core vitality. And so you're sacrificing health on your way to quote unquote health, right? You're sacrificing health trying to get smaller, which is not what we're doing here. But the alternative side is the insulin sensitivity side. And the insulin sensitivity side is actually why I like this medication. It allows your body to have the insulin sensitivity of an Olympian. And so it is actually a performance enhancing drug. And I believe me, at some point, these meds, if they're not already, will be on the Olympic lists for banned substances. Because if you take someone who is a hyper functioning athlete and you give them a microdose of this, so it doesn't completely affect, what it's going to do is it's going to make them even more carb efficient, even more energy efficient, and they'll be able to do more on less energy. And it will improve their fat metabolism, which will make them basically like unstoppable. And so it has that effect. And so we start to go like, wait a second, that's the part I really want to use. What ends up happening though is if you only take these low dosages, right? So it gives you a little appetite regulation, which has some benefit in some portion control. It's kind of like training wheels for food. You should be working with a dietitian because if you're under eating, it's not going to go well. These meds use more salt, right? They affect your aldosterone system in your kidneys. So if you're not hydrating, getting enough water and enough sodium, you're going to be nauseous and you're going to be constipated. Like you need to be working with an RD, but at these low dosages, you can optimize your food, eat properly, hydrate well. Notice we're already talking about lifestyle habits you should be doing anyway, cough, cough. But what'll happen is the weight loss won't be going really crazy. And then the doctor will just say, oh, let's up your dose. No. These meds are super sensitive to exercise. I always tell my clients, and this is meant to be a little bit of an exaggeration. This isn't scientific. A 30-minute walk is like a 30-minute run. And all I can tell you is metabolically, that is fairly accurate. in terms of, calorie, but it's because of the hormonal effects. It has a disproportionate effect. And so you'll take someone who's on these low doses and you'll have them eating properly, not having binge eating tendencies. We can talk about the potential for binge eating disorder here in a bit too, but like they're eating well, and then they just start taking walks and the weight loss just goes nuts. Then they start lifting weights and the weight loss continues. But here's the key. What's so funny, when you look at patients that are lifting weights at least 2, but ideally 3 or 4 days a week, and are taking a 30-minute walk every day, that are taking a half dose of this med and are then working with a dietitian to eat 3 or 4 times a day, hydrate in the morning, sip fluids all day, hydrate in the evening, the weight loss is almost normalized fat loss. And so instead of the starvation side where you end up losing 25% fat, 75% muscle and water, it's opposite. You lose 75% fat, 25% water, and really no muscle to speak of. I actually have numerous clients that through bod pods are actually building muscle while they're on this long term. And it's because they're resistance training and they're fueling. They're actually eating more consistently. And so this med could literally set your metabolism up to work like an Olympian while you do normal activities that you should be doing anyway. And so we're once again back to, this should be the training wheels to get you to ride your bike. Eat well, move well, sleep well, sip well, and all of a sudden let this med activate. This med can't be the intervention. It can be the support of the intervention you're supposed to be doing.
1000%. I have so much to say.
Good. It's your turn. Tag, you're it.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'll first say that insulin side of things. So we talked about the appetite suppression. We talked about some of those side effects that might go along with it, or really just effects of the drug, right? It's the drug working as it's designed. But then on the insulin side of things, I think that's where this drug can really shine, really.
Oh, I agree.
Especially because a lot of our clients have subclinical insulin resistance. And that is maybe part of the reason why they're a bit resistant to fat loss. And so I think that can be really beneficial. And like you said, a lot of these lifestyle interventions also provide the same effect. Exercise is the biggest one. I was talking to a client who's like kind of tapering off this drug and is really worried about, kind of potential rebound. And I said, if you really want to optimize what you've already been doing and continue with some of those effects, if I can give you one piece of advice, it's to keep your body moving. That really is that thing that's going to continue that insulin sensitivity that you're getting from that drug. And you should be taking in that intervention while you're taking the drug at the same time.
Well said.
And as far as the insulin sensitivity, that is another like kind of arena of where some side effects can come into place, namely the low blood sugar. So let me give you an example. I have, a client maybe that's not eating most of the day because they don't feel hungry because of the appetite suppressant. And then they're also getting hyperinsulin sensitivity as a result of this drug. And so their body is just sucking up any glucose or glycogen that's there. And then all of a sudden they're getting low blood sugar.
You're crashing,
So that sounds like being lightheaded. That sounds like being nauseous. That sounds like you're going to pass out. Like those are the feelings that we tend to get. And that is just like a symptom of not using the drug the way it's designed. And so you're going to feel crappy. And, I've had clients that had to run to, their local pharmacy to get like a thing of orange juice because they were like not going to make it through their day. And it's like, yeah, of course, you're hyper insulin sensitive. Your body is sucking up that glucose to use. And it kind of reminds me of how I feel when I'm in peak marathon training.
Fair enough. Just can't get enough carbs.
I'd say, yeah, like it's like, my body just sucks up that glucose because it's constantly like burning a lot of energy. I'm expending a lot of energy, but also because I'm strength training during that to try to maintain that lean mass during training, that muscle tissue is also sucking up that glucose as well. And so if you're not eating well, if you're not eating consistently, I've felt that low blood sugar feeling where you feel like you're going to pass out. Whereas, a normal, like untrained version of myself would have been totally fine going an extra hour or two without eating. So just something to be super mindful of. And that's where having that dietitian, I think, is so, so important as you're navigating this journey with the semaglutide or similar drugs. So yeah, that's kind of just my 2 cents.
I love that. It's funny because you start to realize it's like just because it lets you starve doesn't mean that's a good thing, right? And you start to realize it's like, yeah, of course it removed the hunger, but that doesn't mean it removed the consequences of starving. Starvation is still starvation. It's a short-term game. It's never going to actually pan out for you long-term. And so it is. If this med was advertised less as an appetite suppressant and more as sort of a a habit amplifier is how I'd like to market it. Right? Like, hey, you know what? Like, you're just getting off the couch. Do you want your 30-minute walk to have the metabolic advantage of a 30-minute run? Boom. Do you want to get into a good eating rhythm that you feel satisfied by? Boom.
Yeah.
Like this is a chance. Do we want to work on hydration? The version of you that wakes up and sips electrolytes, has water all day, eats 3 or 4 small meals throughout the day. Initially, protein might be a back burner, but it'll come back, we promise. And so it's, if you're going to put these habits in play, this med will punish you if you don't. If you don't drink enough, you will have a headache and be nauseous. If you don't eat often enough, you will have a headache and be nauseous. If you don't move often enough, you won't feel good. It's to say it's going to punish you if you don't do the things, but it's going to reward you disproportionately if you do them. That's why it's like bumpers on the bowling lane or training wheels on the bicycle. It just gives you a chance to get used to doing what you probably should be doing anyway. But more importantly, that means that the weight loss, the body fat changes, the composition changes, the insulin changes, the A1C dip, all the benefits you get from it aren't the med, they're your lifestyle. And to your point, people go, oh my gosh, but it's going to like rebound. I'm going to gain it all back. Well, it depends. Did you use it to starve yourself? Because if so, yeah, you are. Or did you use it at a microdose, a half dosage, to support good positive habits that then drove it forward? Because if so, just like when you take the training wheels off a bike after you have enough practice, you will continue doing what you're doing. And as you've gotten lighter and leaner and more active, your insulin sensitivity has improved, not because of the med, but because of your habits. So you can carry that. And the only thing I'll note is that coming off of it needs to be as gradual as going on it. I think that's the other thing that happens is when people talk about like, oh my gosh, what if I gain it back? It's like, if you jump straight off of it, that also is hard. Now, there's some solutions we can dig into, but going from a whatever dose you're on to 0 right away, your body's going to lose that, and it's not going to have a chance to kind of like reset itself and normalize. And so you will see, patients do see this massive spike in hunger because they have been in part being reduced by the med, no matter how low the dose.
Totally.
Yeah.
So as far as like the dietitian support, one thing when a client comes to me and says, I'm thinking about this drug, or I'm newly prescribed this drug, or, you know, whatever it is, if this drug is on the horizon, I always help them weigh the costs and benefits, right?
Yeah.
So making sure that they're informed about how the drug works, the potential side effects, aka the drug working as it's designed, what they can expect. Some common pitfalls that I see people falling into, like not hydrating, not eating well, not making those like behavior-based, those habit-based changes that they need to. Also, not addressing their relationship with food. I saw a TikTok the other day that was like,
oh no,
semiglutides, you know, Ozempic, it healed my relationship with food. It cured my eating disorder. It reduced the food. And I'm like, it can't do that. It may reduce some of that like food noise is what you hear it called a lot, but it is not going to repair your relationship with food. It is not going to cure an eating disorder. And I want to dive into the binge eating
that's an important
side
piece
of things.
because while it can't cure it, it could definitely be a tool in that curative process, right?
Yes. And so we also have to be working on like, what was it that if food or the, you know, just kind of your relationship with food, if how we're using it as a significant coping mechanism in your life, what are we going to do when that coping mechanism isn't there anymore?
Exactly.
How are we going to cope?
Yep. It goes back to the cusimia we talked about earlier. And when I mentioned the smoking or even alcohol, like if you've developed an outlet that you use in an abusive way. So smoking's the easiest one, right? Because most people recognize smoking's not good for you. And it's something that has an addictive tendency. It's addictive for 2 separate reasons. It's addictive psychologically and physiologically. Food's more psychologically. But for all intents and purposes, if you are addicted to something, that means that you use it as a coping mechanism and it serves a purpose in your life. It has been the thing that saves you from something bad or scary often enough that you go back to it over and over and over. And it creates a dopamine response. It gives you that sense of relief, right? That -3 to +1. And so if you're someone that's your relationship with food, you've sought out binges late at night as a way to sort of like get away from the world, and the only thing that gives you relief is just to like really fuel or overeat. Or even if it's not a full-on binge, even if it's just you use food as that like mindless zone out escape, that's the first thing that needs unpacked, right? That's
let's
the only
talk about that.
Let's talk about that. And the comment is the way you get rid of that is by one, understanding what it does for you, and then replacing it with better options that do that and do it in what I call a win-win instead of a win-lose,
Mm-hmm.
right? Smoking is a win-lose. In the moment you feel better, but it kills you 10 to 20 years sooner. Eating excessively is a win-lose. In the moment it feels good, but then it leads to all sort of metabolic issues and all sort of physiologic problems down the road.
Mm-hmm.
We want to replace it with a win-win, something that's good now and good later.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times, the way to do that is to remove the temptation initially. And that's no different than people taking nicotine patches to get rid of the craving, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
while they learn to do other things,
Yeah.
right? A lot of times addicts, when they're trying to be free from alcohol, initially they'll avoid gatherings and parties and bars because their brain doesn't know what to do in that situation. They haven't become the alcohol-free human yet.
Yeah.
And so the idea is these meds, they do have a lot of potential, which is they affect the dopaminergic response to food, which is, again, if you have a coping mechanism with food and you eat food and it just sends fireworks and relief to you, these meds will cut that and they will make it feel meh. And it's not that you won't enjoy it, but it won't be this like disproportionate return on investment,
Yes.
which will make it very meh or fine or just almost neutral.
Mm-hmm.
So can it create what I'd call like a forced food neutrality? Yes. Now, if we're using that correctly as dietitians with this person, we would then use the 6 to 12 months that this drug is providing that neutrality to develop other coping mechanisms like moving, like socializing, like hobbies, connection, right? Wired to think and wired to connect and all those types of things. And so in an ideal world, we'd be replacing all these dopaminergic responses. We'd be creating alternative outlets
that are inherently more fulfilling and satisfying in the long term, right? Not just that instant gratification.
They're that win-win. And then when you come off the med, the food will remain. It's, again, a cookie's going to be a cookie. It's going to taste good, but your relationship with that cookie has changed. The cookie is no longer pedestalized. It is no longer your Lord and Savior. It is no longer your superhero with its cape on. It is just a tasty treat. And so you can use this, but like you said, it's not that it guarantees that. You still have to do the work. And that's, if I was going to say one thing about these, is these meds do not fix the problems. They create an atmosphere where it is easier for you to fix the problems. But the problems aren't your weight. The problems are your habits. And so these meds will optimize your relationship with food temporarily. They'll optimize your responsiveness to exercise temporarily. They will optimize your hunger and fullness cycle temporarily while you get used to eating well, moving well, and connecting well. And if we land that plane, on the other side, there are great outcomes. And like I said, we can, as dietitians, we can sneak protein in with essential amino acids and protein drinks and easier to digest protein sources and being opportunistic on timing. We can use hydration and electrolytes to really maximize digestive function, reduce gastroparesis. We can use good carbohydrates to keep the energy stable and keep the meter running across the day and keep you metabolically functioning. And then when you start to come off it, go from half dose to quarter dose, your appetite's going to flare and we're going to add a bunch of protein. That's the first thing we do. I call it the protein wall, right? When you come off the med, you've probably been under eating protein a little, boom, we're going to add even more. And then when you fully come off, we're going to add it again. And what we've then done is you come off the med and you're eating more, but you're eating more of the right things. What ends up happening is you get people that have been only able to tolerate carbohydrates for 6 months. They come off the med abruptly and then they just pound carbohydrates. And it's like, well, your body's not missing carbs. It's missing proteins and fats and fibers. We need to strategically add those back gradually as you tolerate. And so if you're doing it right, there's a way to use this med, learn from it, use it as sort of a controlled period of time. And then there's a way to land it so that it can actually, again, you can stay there. You can arrive at your destination.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I'll oftentimes ask my clients when they're trying to weigh the options of whether or not this is a good idea for them. I always encourage them to ask their doctor, and the same thing goes for like many other drugs on the market aside from weight loss, is what is my exit strategy?
Ooh, yeah, that's so well said.
Yeah, so, is there an exit strategy? Is the plan for me to be on this long term, lifelong? If so, that's just an option that you want to weigh, and is this doctor the person that you want to work with this drug?
Are they willing to actually have that conversation, or do they just say, here's your dose, let me know how it goes, versus, like you said, actually having the conversation. This is something I want to do for a period of time to kind of reset. I'm going to work with an RD.
What would you like to see, like in terms of my health markers, to deem me appropriate to maybe start to taper off of this? Would be a really good question. And a lot of times I get, doctors being like, oh, well, we'll see, just kind of like I'm brushing it off a little bit. Just
Yeah.
really have like an engaged conversation with them. I think that's why, again, it's really important to have that dietitian on board, to be making sure that on more of like on the frequent basis, they're getting those touch points and they're kind of getting, those habits under their belt, and they're just really kind of starting to develop that flow of all of those
Yeah.
things that we've mentioned. So I think knowing your exit strategy, knowing if you want an exit strategy is really
Yeah,
important.
because some people do need to. It's funny, for diabetics, this med is one of the best things you could take. And I'm blanket statementing that, but I do feel that way. When we
Yeah.
look at what it does, it has great efficacy. Now, what's the dosage that they should be on? That's another conversation.
Yeah.
That's a personalized conversation.
Totally.
Women with PCOS, this med has massive potential in being at a low dose, again, not at these starvation doses, but at a low dose being the insulin sensitization that they need. They may benefit from being on a low to moderate dose of it long term. And so there are people that this med can be, long term for. The comment, the side effects, again, the amplified effects, become the limiting factor. If you're on a too high of a dose, you're not going to be able to be on it long term because it's going to compound. Quick math. If you inject 1 unit and it has a 1-week half-life and you inject weekly, that means week 1, there's 1 unit, week 2, there's 0.5 and then 1.5. And then week 3, there's 0.75 and then 1.75. Notice how it's going up. It accumulates in your system. So you take this for 3 years, you're going to have 22 units in your bloodstream. It's not actually 22, but it's going to be a surprising amount.
Yeah.
It's going to have a cumulative effect. And so there's a point at which we go, sometimes this is less is more. And the lower doses may not cause the rapid weight loss, but that's because they're not causing the water and muscle loss. And they require you to participate in your own rescue, which is the only way that this actually works.
Yeah,
you absolutely have to be the leader in this. You have to be the driver. This is much like when we talked about the phentermine, and I said it could have been the lightning bolt. This may be the catalyst that gets you focused on these habits. And that's, if a client sits down with me, a lot of times they'll say, what do you think about this med? And I'll be the first to say, you haven't been consistent enough in prioritizing your own self-care to utilize one of these. Yeah. Or, you know what, hey, I could see where this might help you catalyze those things. Or, hey, you're someone that's really been doing these habits really well, and this medication may be something that gets us over a metabolic hump and provides some value. But then the key is, let's find a doctor that wants to actually do a less is more approach, wants to do and talk about the timeline, is willing to prescribe lower dosages. And let's make sure we're taking body fat and we're assessing lean mass and making sure you're doing that. And as an RD, I want to be there to troubleshoot, right? Initially, a lot of the times these meds don't work well. When people are having these lawsuits where it caused gastroparesis, I guarantee it's because they weren't drinking enough water, because your digestive tract is a giant water slide, and this med uses more water and salt. And so your digestive tract ran dry, and then the food got even more backed up. And so if we had just gotten them hydrated, they might have tolerated the med better. Where they start dealing with headaches because of dehydration, or like you said, they're starving themselves and crashing. And so many of the side effects go away from simple lifestyle intervention. And that's where you start to go, like, you really should have an RD meeting with you bi-weekly or monthly as you taper up, as you maintain, as you taper down, to monitor fat mass and lean mass, to monitor symptoms, because symptoms are basically the med having an amplified effect in a negative way. But most of the time there's an environmental or lifestyle knob to turn to fix that. Or again, say the fat loss slows, the doc's just going to raise the dosage, and that's going to inch you towards the caloric restriction, quote unquote, benefits, which I think are a negative return. And I think we've established that. But on our end, if we saw a slowing, we'd be looking at, okay, well, like, what are we doing from a movement perspective? Have we turned the lifestyle knobs? Are we eating the way we need to eat, drinking the way we need to drink? Are we moving the way we need to move? And if the answer is no, honestly, you don't deserve to continue to lose weight, because you're not doing the things that lifestyle requires. You're not living lighter. I have no interest in getting you lighter just to give you a sticker and take a picture of a scale. I want you thriving, and that comes from you participating in your rescue.
Are our expectations of these interventions matching how we're actually participating in them?
Well said. Right. That's where it's kind of fun, because you start to realize these are a tool in the toolbox, right? Sometimes you need a screwdriver, like I said before. Yeah. Was there anything else you wanted to make sure you shared as you think about clients that you've had that have had experiences?
Not really. The only thing I think of is, like we've talked about how this drug can go right and how this drug can go wrong. I think there are some interesting looks into its utility for things like binge eating. So I wanted to make sure that I heard your thoughts on that, because I'm honestly still a little conflicted.
Yeah. And I think that kind of goes back to what I was saying before with the dopaminergic. That's
Yeah.
really where that research is. And to your point,
Mm-hmm.
you need more research in it. But you start to realize where research starts to become tricky is you have to be very clear on what we're actually looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if you're asking the question, does this cure binge eating disorder? The answer is obviously no.
Mm-hmm.
But does this reduce the dopaminergic response to food that you had a disproportionate dopaminergic response to?
Mm-hmm.
The answer is yes.
Yeah.
Now, if you take the med, don't have the pedestalization of cookies during that time, do zero work on yourself, and then come off the med because there's a shortage or because you don't like it or because it's expensive as heck or whatever,
Yeah.
guess what? Cookies are still going to be cookies. But if you, while you were not thinking cookies were the bee's knees, if you got into some sort of cool new hobby or got into some sort of human connection or developed an intimate relationship or leveled up your life, guess what? Cookies might stay in the drawer a bit easier. And so again, I don't think it's the cure, but I absolutely think it is the thing that can make that process easier. It's like the nicotine patch. It's not the reason you quit smoking, but it definitely can help make the process of cessation easier.
Totally. So it's like, if you're going to be on this drug, don't be an asshole to yourself.
Why did we just spend 45 minutes talking about
really
this? That's exactly what we needed to say. Use it as a tool in the toolbox.
Yeah.
Make sure you're using it as training wheels on a bike. This does not give you the excuse to not participate in the habits. If you're using this as a quick fix, I'm going to see you in 3 to 5 years and say, I told you so. And I don't want to say that. I don't get any pleasure of people playing checkers in a game of chess. I don't love people crashing their bodies just to gain a bunch of weight back. Get off the weight loss roller coaster. Join the lifestyle change challenge.
Yes.
If we need to use meds to support that, let's have that conversation.
Yeah.
But your willingness to actually prioritize self-care, which that can look a million different ways, is really what matters here. And this is just one of the things that can help aid in that learning process, that trial and error that all of our clients go through, the year or 2 years it takes to live like the healthier you. And guess what? You'll become them, I promise.
Totally. I mean, deciding to take a drug for weight loss is a serious decision, and we need to treat it like one, right? And so you have to really take a serious look at your life and your environment. I've talked about how we live in this grander, more like obesogenic environment. Well, we need to create a sub-environment in that is really conducive to your well-being.
Well said.
So that means that, maybe even like your relationships, the friendships that you have, if they're not enhancing your life and your health, it might be worth rethinking, right? Like if your friends aren't going to be supportive of you trying to make healthier eating choices, or maybe drinking less, or, you want to have a group of friends that maybe is willing to go for a walk or a run with you, or to go to a workout class. Thinking about some of the things that you choose to keep in your house in terms of food. I'm talking about the things not to keep in your house, also the things to keep in your house.
Exactly. The things to add to the pantry and the refrigerator.
Thinking about your day-to-day schedule. Does movement have a place on your schedule? If your health is important to you, and you're able to physically move, it should have a place on your calendar.
Exactly.
On a regular basis. And so I think, like all the things we're saying, it just makes a ton of sense to take a really critical look at your lifestyle, regardless of whether or not you decide to be on these medications. But certainly these medications really require you to meet them halfway in terms of your lifestyle.
Yep. I would challenge everyone to look at what their intent behind the med is. If it's to lose a quick amount of weight, or it's to just challenge or focus on weight loss, it's probably not the right intention. If it's meant to be used as an aid in your path to being healthier, because everything you just said sounds great, but it also takes years. Right? When we're sitting here like, hey, you need some new friends. Okay, like that takes time, right? And I don't disagree with you, but I also recognize that part of the reason in the moment, starving yourself and losing a quick 10 sounds like it's the fast road. And what we're talking about sounds like the slow road, right? It takes 2 years to change your life so that new things that actually matter actually exist in your life, and you're able to navigate them. It takes a couple years. What's funny is these 6-month quick or 3-month quick fixes, if you do them 20 times over the course of 15 years, well, that wasn't actually the fast route. 15 years later, you're still in the same place you were.
Right.
So our route is actually the fast route, but in the first moment, the initial comparison of lose 40 pounds in the next 6 weeks, That feels like the fast route. It's a lie. It's full of BS. And all we can do is help people see that. And then also note that some meds like this may be able to help find the balance where you can focus on this road that we're talking about, the long journey, the long play. This might make some of those things easier. Not having the cravings while you figure out your relationship with food and unpack friendships and change how many nights a week you're out binge drinking. These are conversations, these could be helpful. And so it's, again, it may be a very useful tool, but it really is a case specific endeavor.
Totally.
And all I'd encourage anyone listening is make sure you're working with someone who actually understands the meds. And that is not all doctors. I will say that out loud. Physicians are great, but like any profession, some are better than others. There's a surprising amount of docs out there that do not understand this med. It's kind of scary, actually, and they don't understand why it causes the effects it does. The basic mechanism of action I just described is something that every physician should be equipped with, and they aren't for whatever reason. It's not my problem right now, but the clients that get misled are our problem. So make sure you're working with a practitioner that is knowledgeable. That could be a case-specific RD. That's a shameless plug. Like our team, we've done trainings on this. We stay up to date. We work with hundreds of people that have utilized them short-term and long-term. I've had clients that have come off of them and have 2 and 3 year weight retention and body retention. I have clients that have benefited from micro doses for extended periods. We can definitely speak to it in our profession. So if you're struggling to find a practitioner that can support, reach out to us. It's what we're here for. Also, this is one of those where it's like, hey, hit us up in the comments. This was this topic, right? This is one that it's like, please share it with friends. Please spread the health for us. That's what this one's about. And I'd love to see what your comments and thoughts are about this one. And we can always provide some additional insights about where the research is or isn't, where the case study experience is or isn't, and get you set up to talk with one of us if this is something you're trying to figure out if it's right for you. So.
Absolutely. My closing argument is just that if you want the fastest route to whatever it is you're trying to achieve, the fastest route is to not try to take shortcuts.
Do it the right way the first time.
Do it the right way the first time so you don't have to keep doing it over and over again.
I love that. That is great advice from a wise practitioner.
And we are here to help you. This is what we love to do. We love to help people navigate this stuff because there's not enough good information out there.
Exactly.
So hit us up in the comments if you have any questions about, any specific side effects you've navigated or just any experiences you've had. We love to talk through this stuff. And man, this was a good one. We really wrapped it up nicely.
I love it. Absolutely. You can always find us at casespecificnutrition.com. Send us a message. You can reach out to our care coordinating team. They'll check your insurance and get you scheduled with an RD. You can check us out on Case Specific Nutrition on YouTube and on Instagram. And I am Pittsburgh Dietitian on Instagram, always putting out some thoughtful Thursdays and mindset Mondays and habit talk. And
at Devon the Dietitian on Instagram.
Devon the Dietitian on Instagram. So there you have it. Thanks everyone for listening. Like I said before, please share this. Please like this. Please spread the health with us. We're trying to set the world right, one listen at a time.
All righty. Yeah, have a good one.